All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm Stephen Taylor again, and I am super pleased this morning to have Elizabeth Adams here with us and honored to be able to introduce her to you all. As I mentioned earlier, I was aware of some of her work in technology and policy with the city of Minneapolis, and I thought it fit really well with our theme and our conference, and I'm excited to have her at Code Freeze. As an introduction, she's a non-resident race and tech fellow at Stanford University's Institute of Human-Centered AI. She impacts the world, serving as a key constituent for the United Nations 3C Roundtable on Artificial Intelligence. She served as an appointed member of the Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee for the city of Minneapolis. And she continues to influence the local tech and equity conversation and framework. So welcome, Elizabeth, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So again, thank you so much. I am Elizabeth Adams. I'm a native Minnesotan, so I'm super excited to be here today. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share a bit of my work and my research, as well as a bit of my own personal experience as it relates to AI ethics and public oversight of surveillance technology. So I've been researching and working in the AI ethics space for the past 3 years. I've been a technologist for over 20 years, and I've led large-scale technology initiatives where I ran a systems integration lab with over 200 technologists. And as a team, we worked together with one goal in mind, and that was to keep everyone safe. And as we developed those technology solutions for people all over the world in support of this work, I oversaw the development of a technology insertion program. And the goal of this program was to decide, very quickly if the technology that was being developed, purchased, or customized would align with our chief goal of keeping people safe. And I say that because not only do I have the actual experience of setting up teams that have this kind of chief aim in mind, I also have seen the consequences of what happens when tech design is not human-centric. So I'm a founding member of POSME, and POSME stands for Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment. It's a local measure within the ACLU's CCOPS effort. And we formed this coalition early last year to begin advocating for transparency, oversight, accountability, and equity in technology in Minneapolis. And following the murder of George Floyd, there was an urging for accountability in how law enforcement uses AI-enabled technologies that they have at their disposal. So POSME does not come from a place of technophobia. Rather, our coalition is about embracing technology and acting proactively so that when these tools are implemented in communities have trust that these tools are being used responsibly and not used to target certain populations or used by law enforcement to overreach in various communities. So quickly, let me just share a little bit about what is in our overall POSME goal. And these are the various surveillance examples. And so these are the various technologies that we've included in our original draft ordinances. And I simply just want to highlight here the enormous amount of work happening in the community to ensure that Minneapolis residents can live safely and confidently as more surveillance technology makes its way into our communities. And so we were hoping initially for transparency. But for the remainder of my time, I'm going to focus on the huge community lift that happened as a result of the absence of AI ethics, in my opinion, meaning the absence of an organization's practice of a set of principles, techniques, values, and accepted standards that guide the behavior and conduct in the development and deployment of artificial intelligence-enabled technologies. So the biggest result from our POSME work happened on February 12th of this year, with the Minneapolis City Council banning facial recognition technology. And that's a huge community lift. And what I want to share mostly are the impacts to communities when government used AI-enabled technologies to help govern society, but they have a high error rate due to algorithmic bias. So I hope to make the case towards the end of this presentation for the importance of AI ethics and humane engineering. But behind the headlines, there are many, many stories. And you can see, before you can even get to a city council vote to ban facial recognition technology or to even take up legislation, there are hours upon hours of advocacy work happening. But the question is why? Why should residents in a city have to take up the mantle to advocate for a ban on technology? What is it about certain technologies and their use that cause communities to unite and work together to advocate for not just transparency, but for an actual ban? And how does what's happening on the left from a technology development perspective in corporations and offices around the world create a situation that has happened on the right? And these missing links obviously create opportunities. But if we think about what's happening on the left in workspaces all over the world, obviously budgets have been approved, employees have been hired, someone is overseeing the life cycle of the development project. Work begins, agile design, development, testing, execution, monitoring, and new versioning, only to end up with what has happened on the right. And yet leadership still get their bonuses while this technology has made its way into communities and is causing harm. Since this use case or presentation is focused on our recent post-me accomplishment, the ban on facial recognition technology in Minneapolis, I'm going to focus a little bit on that. So facial recognition is a form of computer vision and is a way of recognizing a human face through technology. It takes images, detects faces, and compares these faces to a data set to identify the face and its features. A data set contains millions of images to help train the systems to spot attributes like our hair, our eyes, our skin color, and even facial hair. And bias in facial recognition happens when there is a lack of diversity in the training data, when the training data does not include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, ages, and skin tones as examples. So let's take it a step further and consider a facial recognition tool that captures and identifies you and has created a face print. And this is one way to kind of illustrate how that works. Again, it captures details of your face, it creates a unique face print, and tries to match your face print in a database. And while facial recognition looks like a promising tool to screen large crowds without invasive searches, in reality, it hasn't always lived up to the hype. And we've seen in our work a reinforcement of racial biases, lack of regulation, false arrests, and lack of transparency. In this example, we can see how computer vision technology has predicted various items in an image. In both pictures, a temperature is being taken. With the image of the lighter skinned person on the left, the algorithm predicts one set of labels: technology, electronic device, photography, and possibly a mobile phone. But with the image of the darker skinned person on the right, the algorithm predicts and labels the items in the photo as a gun, a firearm, or a plant, or photography. And remember I said earlier, bias happens when there's a lack of diversity in the training data, when that training data does not include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, and ages. And what has been demonstrated is what is causing these errors in the labeling. To take it a step further, in this example, we highlighted the image to see what prediction would be given. And as you can see, once the image was lightened, the gun was not part of the prediction. And these are the technologies that are being sold and used by law enforcement around the world. So when you see these things I'm showing you, I want you to keep at the forefront of your mind that everyday citizens are doing the work of calling these things out, because the impacts to communities of color and vulnerable populations are so great. And all of this was missed during the entire technology life cycle that I covered earlier, where there was no diverse or inclusive lens put on that life cycle. I want to invite you to review on your own a case concerning Mr. Robert Williams. A New York Times article highlights how Mr. Williams was arrested in Michigan after being incorrectly identified by a facial recognition system and wrongly accused as being a perpetrator in a theft. He was arrested in front of his family, and he was not told why he was being arrested. So for those of us who come from a Black and brown lived experience, this is highly alarming. There's been little to no transparency. And as we've seen, there's evidence in that some facial recognition systems have a higher error rate on people of color. Now, I haven't been able to discover the exact facial recognition tool that was used, but we in Minneapolis wanted to bring the possible harms of facial recognition and its use as part of surveillance tech closer to home. On our postme.mn page, we have a whole section dedicated to Clearview AI. Clearview AI is a tool that was used by the Minneapolis Police Department. And as I mentioned, you can go to postme.mn if you want to find out more details of our research. But what I'll highlight here is that Clearview AI is a company that gained international attention for building facial recognition technology by training its AI system on billions of photos that it scraped from social media websites without permission. And their position is, if you posted it, then it's public. And we felt that in Minneapolis, residents deserve civic infrastructure that champions transparency, respects community standards, and performs effectively. And Clearview AI failed across the board. As you can see here, some of the reasons that we highlighted were lack of transparency, failure to perform effectively, no independent review, and disregards of standards. And in fact, several major technology companies such as Microsoft, Facebook, and YouTube issued cease and desist letters against Clearview AI. There are three big reasons we gained momentum in Minneapolis, but again, we are talking about what didn't take place during the technology life cycle, and now advocates have to find a way to help figure this out in their communities. And advocates have to find a way into city government, into the processes, into priorities, all to support the work of wanting safe and trustworthy technology in their cities. So for the work in Minneapolis, we initially, as I mentioned before, started out because there wasn't transparency in how these tools were being used. And because of this lack of transparency in the use of these tools, and specifically around facial recognition technology, this did not align with the city's values around racial equity and data privacy. In December of 2017, the city passed racial equity ordinances. And what that meant is that the city decided that for all of their businesses, they would add a racial equity lens on all of the work. So housing, education, jobs, and so forth, to make sure that things were equitable. Also in February of 2020, data privacy principles were passed by the Minneapolis City Council. And basically the language there says, if the city is collecting your data, they have to tell you why they're collecting your data, who's collecting it, how it was collected, how long it's going to be collected, and what is happening with your data. And after the murder of George Floyd last summer, the Minneapolis City Council declared racism a public emergency. So that meant that they could immediately prioritize certain items and resources to go towards things that appeared to be racist or harmful to various communities. So again, because in order to ban technology and to make it to become law, many questions have to be asked, they have to be answered, they have to be thought through, in addition to the significant amount of work that goes into understanding civic tech. Who are the policy influencers? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the decision makers? Who will be the administrators of these laws? And what are their priorities? So to actually have a ban on technology, it's a big, heavy community lift. And what many Black and brown communities and other vulnerable populations are facing is that those who are designing these technologies are designing them with Black, Indigenous, people of color, and others impacted as an afterthought. And where is the joy in life in that? And so I won't go through all of these questions here, and I'm hoping that we can have more of a dialogue about them in the Q&A section. But what I want to mostly point out is that these questions are the result of rapid responses that communities have to take on because they have to. Because who doesn't want to live safely and confidently in their own homes and in their own communities? With the glaring missing links, I want to bring us back to this particular slide. And if you've noticed, I've taken out the line that separates technology development from what happened on the other end, because there are many, many opportunities for us to bridge the gap. And the questions still remain, where do we go from here? And this is where I hope that this real life use case provides some perspective on how the design worlds and the social impact worlds collide, and why we need solutions to close the gap. So I will leave you with this. I love this diagram created by the Next Generation Initiative, because it gives people an opportunity to start a conversation, maybe start research, or hopefully get engaged in what is responsible AI or purposeful AI. And it is 3 years old. And so I'd like to just share, I would add 3 additional things. I think responsible AI or purposeful AI or humane engineering AI should be auditable, explainable, and of course, what I think is a huge priority is equity. Not just tech that allows communities to thrive and prosper, but also technology processes that create an inclusive decision-making opportunities, as well as equity in the ownership of this technology. And there are various ways to get started, and I hope that this will help you think differently about the impacts certain technologies are having on communities, and as a result of the missed opportunities on the front end. I realize that was a lot to unpack, but I hope that it gives us a good starting place for our dialogue. And so with that, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, you've certainly given us a lot to think about, and this last year has really brought this to the forefront of really the nation's consciousness, as well as kind of the dialogue in technology. So, well, a lot of questions out there. If you could post your questions in the Q&A, I know we've already gotten some here, or in the chat in Whova. I've asked Dave to field some of the questions that are being posted in Zoom, because I'm not seeing those in the chat line. One of the questions here that came through, and I know there's kind of a dialogue between, you know, is it the tech that's at fault, or is it the data? One of the questions, if the tech is constantly improving, if facial recognition's got better and removed bias, would you be okay with it? That is, if facial recognition software were always appropriate, is it always inappropriate, or is it just that current implementations include bias?
Okay, so that's a good question. The first thing I'll say is I do not have a problem with any technology. I'm a technologist. I actually like technology. I just don't like technology that's harmful to humans. And so for me, I think that there are purposeful ways to use it. So for instance, let's talk about a child that's lost in a mall. Wouldn't you want that technology to help that parent or caregiver find that technology? Or maybe someone's parent who is suffering from dementia is on the street and they can't be found. And so maybe that's another use for it. So absolutely, there are opportunities for technology. And as I mentioned, the coalition, we are not technophobia. We actually want technology. And I don't think anyone who's a technologist thinks technology is going to go away. It's not. That's why I want to move towards purposeful technology, because at some point we are going to be living, and hopefully in my lifetime I'll get to see this, we're going to be living side by side with drones and robots and other intelligence that is happening around us. And so we've got to find ways and steer another path so that we're not just addressing bad actors in this space, but we're actually guiding the next generation and those of us who are interested in it in a more purposeful way. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Christopher. Yeah, I guess the inverse of that question is, there ways in which technology can actually help in the equation? Do you envision like technology being a partner in creating fairness and equity in society?
Well, obviously it can, but I think what we've seen happen, at least here in the US, is there's such a rush to be out into the marketplace and be the first to get out, you know, get your products out, get it sold, get it, you know, and used. that there really isn't an opportunity to bring the community or people who will be impacted by this technology. Well, there's been opportunities, people just have not made that a priority. And I say that that's fascinating to me because last year, when we were all faced with stay-at-home orders, companies were able to quickly surge technology professionals to figure out ways for us to work from home, to figure out ways for us to continue doing our business. But why is it that we can't do the same thing and put the same sense of urgency around the technology that's being developed? So there's plenty of ways that we can do this work. There's plenty of opportunities. It just has not become a priority for organizations, in my opinion.
And hopefully some of the work that you are doing will make that a priority. Speaking of which, how it's impacting Minneapolis and kind of the metro area currently, what are some of the most common ways AI and machine learning are used today in Minneapolis? I mean, you mentioned a few as far as facial recognition. Is that the only one, or are there other ways that we're employing those AI algorithms?
Minneapolis is using a lot. They're using spy planes. They're using license plate readers. There's an opportunity for gait recognition, which is how someone walks. There is, as I mentioned, facial recognition. I have to pull up my slide, but there are a number of different things. And there are also now a big push for smart grid surveillance and energy consumption, because landlords want to be able to tell if 5 people are living in a place or 1 person is living in a place. And again, so they're looking to start doing this type of surveillance. So yeah, there's many different ways. There's video surveillance, obviously. There's a site that you can go out to see where all the video cameras are in the city of Minneapolis, and they're mostly around communities of color and where vulnerable populations live. Minneapolis also gets its feed from U.S. Coast Guard along the Mississippi River, along the north side of Minneapolis. And I do want to make one point of clarification, is that the Minneapolis City Department does not own facial recognition technology. They don't own the Clearview. They have access to it from Hennepin County. So that cut off its use, and it cut off its opportunity to procure it. But no, it's used lots of different places. And this actually was a really big discussion with a lot of policymakers last year, because with the protest and all different types of things that were happening, City Council wanted to make sure that if there was something such as a Boston bomber, that they could have access to tools to find out and figure out, who the perpetrators were. So there's some small exceptions that are built into the ban on facial recognition ordinance.
And a lot of the work that you described kind of centers around kind of building accountability into these systems. So you're kind of looking at oversight over these technologies so that they're employed for people rather than against them, I guess. Mm-hmm. Is there other ways that you can ensure accountability? How is that conversation taking place? Does it have to be at a municipal or state or federal level, or outside of government purview?
Actually, I think accountability starts way up in the beginning of the process. That's one of the ways. And that's what I mentioned about creating these kind of AI ethics processes and procedures and techniques and values and a code of standards that an organization can use. Because why should I, and this is a good conversation, why should I take away time from golfing and sailing and hanging out with my family and gardening to take up the mantle to do this kind of advocacy work to help figure out the accountability, right? Shouldn't we want to do that along the life cycle? And I think that that's an opportunity for discussion and an opportunity for all of us to kind of figure out, who are technologists, where you can play a part in that. So because we don't have, standards that every technology organization is following and regulation across the board, various groups are trying to help to figure that out. And I think that all of us have a responsibility, because technology impacts all of our lives. If you have children, it impacts, your life with depending on the tools that you're using, the smart toys that you are using. And so accountability, I would hate to think that it lands on one person or one institution or one group.
Yeah, I like that answer because it really kind of brings it back to us, right? We're all in some ways accountable and have to take some responsibility. So that kind of leads into the next question. How can an engineer who feels uncomfortable with a problem or solution they're being asked to explore or implement surface their ethics in that dilemma?
That's a good question, because that's actually how I started. I started by following my curiosity. And I think that one person can make a big difference. So let's think about this. 3 years ago, I saw a video called AI Ain't I a Woman by Joy Buolamwini, where she called out algorithmic bias and facial recognition. And I went to a group of data scientists to begin to ask questions. I didn't want to appear invasive. I did not want to appear like I was attacking their work. I simply started asking questions. And then from there, I started conducting learning events where people would come and learn about this, and we started having dialogue. I then went on and caught the attention of some executives, and then we started building AI ethics principles, and I was able to continue doing that work and doing it with the city of Minneapolis. So all I can say is it takes one person to follow their curiosity, follow a path, and start asking questions, but don't stop. If your organization isn't one that can support that, there are plenty of organizations, academia opportunities, other standards boards that would love your feedback, your lived experience, but the work can continue, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a great way to maybe start the conversation with your organizations or start an ethics kind of a review. Once some of this technology is let out of the bag, so say it gets past your ethics review board and gets out there, how hard is it to, or even is it possible to roll it back?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily suggest rolling it back if you have a process that during your monitoring phase, as new information becomes available, you can quickly and agilely learn how to ingest it so that you can get something out sooner. And I know that that can be a big challenge. I actually talked to a company that does immersive, offices. And you have to create an avatar, and the avatars for the Black and brown people were horrible. We look like monsters. And so I had a conversation with them about their process, and what they told me, and they were honest, was that the next version would have better avatars, and that they did not want to wait to release for that. So I understand that, right? But at the same time, I was not able to participate in that particular launch because I refused to show up with that avatar. And I did not feel like I needed to create a lighter skinned avatar in order to represent myself. So I would say if a company can build in the monitoring phase, if they can build in audibility, I mean, it's a practice, right? You're not really going to get it right the first time, just like any other types of technology. But I do think it's important that you have a group of folks that are monitoring, collecting that information, ingesting it, so that you can build in the proper budgets for new releases.
Which kind of leads into the question of monitoring and oversight, as AI systems are often complex and they're only becoming increasingly more relevant. Have you identified a framework for auditing these systems in a way that could inform the community and allow them to make those decisions about this technology? And how can we get more accountability from our government agencies who are shopping for these technologies?
So that's a good point. And there are lots of groups that are popping up with frameworks. And I would suggest that people find them, do a search, an internet search, and figure out an organization that works with your culture and works best with you. From a global perspective, the World Economic Forum has started a pilot, which I'm hoping to help get an organization that I'm working with in that pilot. And it would take you through a series of steps like independent verification and validation steps. Those are old technology terms, but to just give you a sense that in the end, you actually come out certified. And this company already has high NIST scores for their facial recognition technology, but they want to lean even further into it to be not just have high scores from a US-based standards organization, but globally be a part of, an auditing and an accreditation framework. So there are some that I think it's just a matter of starting somewhere and helping people understand that just the fact that you have identified a need to want to build AI ethics and responsible teams, that's a great start, but we've got to do more work.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, there definitely needs to be more done. And when you're looking at this, De Silva brings up an interesting question. It's kind of the question. It's like, well, the manufacturers make a gun, but it's actually the person that uses it that does the damage. He writes that how much of ethics is attributable to the tech company that makes it, and how much is the group deploying it? I mean, it's just a tool, obviously, right?
Well, it's a tool, but if biases are built into the tool, and then you have human biases, and we're talking about facial recognition, that are brought into the process of using the tool. So let's just think about facial recognition. So let's just think about facial recognition that has algorithmic bias. And because the company has not involved diverse perspectives along the life cycle, you have issues with training, marketing materials, as well as customer care support. That particular company goes to some conference and they are selling the shiny new toy to some organization and telling them that this will help you catch bad guys. Let's just use that as an example. So in the city of Minneapolis, there's only 8% of law enforcement live in the city. So these employees or these police officers, their kids don't play with the kids in the city. They don't know the store owners. They don't know the librarians from, some person on the street. They don't know the good citizens and so forth. And so they're using these tools that already have some sort of bias to augment the work that they do. And they're also coming in with their own human bias. I have no idea how Clearview AI is being trained. I don't know if they're using AI nudging, you know what I'm saying, to nudge them to, think of a certain group as perpetrators and so forth. So there are many, many points along the process. And I've talked to technology companies where they are now actually addressing the training portions of it. They want to make sure that their tool is trained appropriately. And I think that was part of what Clearview AI's point was like, look, we're just doing our stuff and we can't help how these organizations or these law enforcement agencies are using our tool. But there are some companies that are working specifically with law enforcement to extend this bias, and the Amazon Ring is one of them. So Amazon Ring or Amazon on one side says, we're not going to sell our facial recognition tool, but we are going to sell Amazon Ring to 2,000 law enforcement organizations, and we're going to control the messaging that they use, and we're going to help them talk to communities so that they can opt in to the surveillance so that they can get around asking for warrants. So there's lots and lots of challenges in this space, but it goes across the full gamut. Everyone's responsible.
Right, which brings up a good point. We really should be looking at these companies and holding them or ensuring that they are looking at legal use for these technologies. For example, he brings up the GPS, which can track movement, which, there are various Fourth Amendment implications to that. So, so Alina writes, how do we get a good review process of adopting this technology in government? And should there be a standard review process? Should all cities and government agencies follow the same review process for looking at these technologies?
I don't know. I have spoken with a number of adjacent cities and advocates about what is appropriate and important for their communities. I think that's a good question, but I would say involve the communities because they can tell you how they want to live and thrive. And so in Minneapolis, because we've prioritized racial equity and because we already have data ordinances passed, we can work within that framework and create, we also have cultural communities. And so I think that is a good question. I mean, it's, things are happening so fast that I don't know. I'm just going to be honest. That's a good question. I don't know if the same standard across the board for every city works because different cities have different challenges. But I do think that there should be public oversight in this civic tech process.
Yeah, the next question kind of relates to that. Is he asks that, or mentions that FIPS is a standard for protection against sensitive or valuable data with the federal government systems. And is there something that's being developed currently for AI tech use in government systems? A similar kind of a standard, is that evolving, or are you aware of anything that's currently in the works?
I do believe through NIST, and then I know that several government organizations, I just saw something, the Veterans Administration posted their AI ethics, or their ethics, I should say, principles. But I think even in the federal government, each of them, especially with the three-letter organizations, they are deciding for themselves how they, how the AI-enabled technologies will be used within their departments. So I don't know. I have not done enough research from that perspective. So I apologize. I don't have a good answer for that.
The next question, I think that's kind of an ongoing question, right? I mean,
Yeah.
That's something that's evolving currently. There's, that's part of your work is kind of helping develop those. I guess the next question ties into that, because how do we know when we can confidently say this technology has no bias, or is there a point, or are we just constantly evaluating it? Is there a point where it's like, oh, this is good?
Yeah, and the thing about this, that now that we're talking about human and human bias, it is very, very difficult to figure out if you've ever reached the end of that evolution. And I don't know. And as I had mentioned, when I ran a technology systems integration lab, it was for a military operation for the Department of Defense. And our chief aim was to keep war fighters safe. And so every technology that we use, that we brought into the lab, that we were responsible for being stewards of, if it could not interface, if it could not integrate, if it could not be used in a way that kept these warfighters safe, we rejected it. It was just that simple. But it took time to build that kind of process. But that was in more of a controlled lab, right? And we weren't really doing the work for profit. So I think that's the bigger issue is how do we stop? I don't want to say stop, but how do we manage in society when these organizations and these people are getting rich and they're getting their bonuses and they have no connection to what is happening in the real world as their tool makes it out. So I don't know. There's lots of, I don't know if we ever get to the end.
Sure. The next, yeah, and it is like an ongoing process, so there might never be a final done. The next couple of questions kind of relate to the question whether the algorithms or the data, where do those faults come from, and kind of where do we look to solve those? So most machine learning models are black box systems that learn the data seeded to them. The data would need to be properly stratified to remove the bias. Is there a good place to find technical documentation on this, on removing bias from data fed to the systems? Is there a resource or guide? Some kind of statistics might be needed to remove the bias. However, not having much data. Oh.
Yeah, I would turn to research done by MIT. I would turn to research done by Joy Buolamwini, who's out of MIT. She is probably the one that has spearheaded a lot of projects around eliminating bias. She is also working, I believe, with the government on doing something like an FDA process, where you have to go through this kind of, very rigorous thing in order for these technology tools. I don't know where that is in that process, or, what's happening with that. But yeah, there are plenty of options. I think people, again, what I want to say is, and I tell people this all the time, is that wherever you want to start, just do an internet research and you can start finding the bodies that have been addressing this work. And so, because I may forget, and, I just want to make sure that everyone feels like there's a place for them in this space. And I don't care what your background is. If you're a shoemaker, I don't care. You have your lived experience and your experience as a shoemaker and how technologies are being used whatever space you are in, you can play a part in making sure that technologies are safely designed and then implemented and delivered to communities.
Ryan Fisher actually kind of takes onto that question a little bit in asking whether there's ways that we can work on this technology like facial recognition. It's not at a point where we want to even think about deploying it now, but is there, can confidence rating or weighting of facial recognition be used to offset inaccuracies of the tech from misidentifying and targeting communities of color? Is there ways that we can fix it and then redeploy it, or is this just like screwed up technology to begin with?
Yeah, there are companies that have pulled it back. IBM has pulled their facial recognition technology back. I believe Google has, and I think Amazon has a year moratorium on it. So there are companies that are taking that approach. And then there are companies that are not. They're not all bad companies. Some companies that have, like I said, have high NIST scores, are leaning into this work, are really trying to figure it out. They have sold to businesses that want to use facial recognition technology to identify their employees as a replacement for a badge, or they're also deploying their technology in train stations and in airports, as well as stadiums. And so, yeah. So I hope that answers it, that I think there are different organizations that are taking different approaches to how they are figuring it out. I'm for the side that let's continue to evolve. Let's continue and see, but maybe we might need to pilot something and put it in more of a controlled environment. But how else will you get better? And we're not in the waterfall days unless you are NASA, right? Where you take the time to do all the steps. We're living in an agile environment. And so I think we need to lean into that.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great way to think about it iteratively, to kind of constantly be improving these systems.
Yeah.
You showed an example of a system that was, obviously faulty, that categorized the firearm differently depending on brightness of the image. What system was that? Is there a source or link that you can point us to learn more about that?
I will put it in the comments. It came from someone, our research assistant who was working on it, post me. I think it was Amazon's recognition that is just out there, or Google. I can't remember, but I will absolutely put that out there. I'll put it in the comments.
Very good. Yeah, a lot of great questions out there, and thank you once again. I don't know if anybody, I think we just have just a couple of minutes left here, so maybe one last question. Otherwise, yeah, thank you so much. For folks that want to get started in their organization, having these conversations, is there a way you recommend approaching it, I guess? I mean, how do you start like an ethics overview of tech?
It's so easy. It's so easy. So, and the reason why I say it's so easy is because I did it. You know what I mean? Like 3 years ago, I knew nothing about AI ethics. I knew about technology, but I didn't know about AI ethics. I was just learning. And I was actually just sitting one day and I learned about it. And so I actually started writing a book. I wrote a small ebook about it to kind of crystallize my message. And then I started connecting with people on LinkedIn. I started asking people for, if they could point me to articles, because I know people are sensitive about their time. And so do as much as you can to educate yourself. There are, eCornell has like a 6-week class on data analytics. MIT has something for executives on algorithms and artificial intelligence to give you that if you want to go the certification route. But basically, I talk with a member of Women in AI, and it is a global community of women, 5,000 women, 135 countries, and 40 ambassadors. And so join an organization where you can start sharing the resources. IEEE is another organization that I joined my first year in this space, and I worked on AI nudging and emotion AI. And those were very, very awesome opportunities because I was working with people all over the world. And we were just talking about these things and figuring out how we can present better standards. So yes, everyone's perspective is needed and valuable. And I hope, that people will get involved in this work in some way and somehow.
Me too. Well, that was an awesome presentation. I appreciate you joining us. If you want to learn more, there's going to be a deep dive into some of the technical algorithms and data by US Bank. They're going to be sharing some stories from the field. So that's going to be a breakout session starting here shortly. So once again, thank you, Elizabeth. And
thank you.
Yep, and that concludes the second keynote. Next will be breakouts following a break here. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.